When talking about collecting art, people say all the time, just buy what you love. Well, I think that's terrible advice. And if the whole world followed that mantra, 99% of households would have nothing but Thomas Kinkade paintings and pictures of cats. Yes, actually liking the art is a factor, and we'll get more into that later. But if you're doing more than simply shopping that last section of IKEA for those square things to hang on your black walls, there's really some things you need to know. If you actually want to buy art, you need to be educated on the process. So sound those church bells. I'm here to help. Now let's get into it. Art lovers, welcome back to the channel. My name is Christopher West, and this is the place where we talk about all things modern and contemporary art and design. And today we are talking about art collecting. Actually, we talked about collecting last week too, but that was more how to collect if you're a billionaire. For those of you who might not be billionaires, this is for you. In fact, you don't even need to be a millionaire or even a 10,000-aire. I think I started collecting when I was a 700-aire. Last week we learned that the best way, and perhaps the only way, to use art as an investment was to collect art that was already incredibly expensive. We learned that the number of people who are actually spending six figures or more annually was actually quite tiny. And they're basically just trading the same 100 or 200 artists back and forth. But buying art for investment is just one reason. And I would argue for the 99.9% of us, it's the least important reason. Art collecting can be incredibly rewarding. And by doing so, you are not only supporting your creative community, but you're becoming part of an art ecosystem. And yes, art can also be a potential store of value that could one day be donated to a museum or passed on to future generations. But there are things you need to know and understand before you ever take that deep dive. First things first, you need to educate yourself. And I'm not talking about going to Yale and studying art history. But go to every museum you can. Go to galleries, attend talks and lectures, visit other collectors' homes. The more you look, the more you experience art and learn about it, the more you start to recognize what could be derivative or a uniquely original voice. Just because every asshole billionaire has a Jeff Koons in their house doesn't mean you want to be caught with an imitation or a fake in your own house. You'll become an art world laughingstock before you even start on this art collecting journey. Okay, we'll talk about that fake Koons on another day, I swear. Just don't be like me. Now pretend you've been invited to an art opening. You arrive and grab that glass of wine. It's almost always white wine, unless you come to my place, then of course I would offer you a fine California Cabernet. You mingle with the crowd, perhaps even meet the artist. You might be having a lovely evening, and then you see that piece, the one that really speaks and resonates with you, and it happens to be in your budget. So you grab your credit card and make that purchase. That's great, amazing even. But the moment you walk out that door, that painting is pretty much valueless. And I'm not even saying that's a bad thing, I just want you armed with the truth. Now you might be looking at me like I'm the fool, convinced that that piece of art you bought last weekend was by an artist that's certain to become the next Andy Warhol. Well, they're not. They're just not. Even if you live in New York City, the global art capital of the world, there are about 1,400 galleries showing tens of thousands of artists. And only a tiny fraction will break the chains and become traded on the open art market. Then imagine the odds if you live in Dallas or Denver or right here in Indianapolis. But what you've done with that art purchase, what you can't really do at auction, is become part of a community, a part of a pretty exclusive club where all of a sudden you're being invited to dinners and hanging out with some really interesting people. You've made your city a better place. And I've said nothing about the value of having a really cool piece hanging on your wall. It can not only be an interesting conversation starter, but shows the depth of your class and sophistication. If you've budgeted $50,000 for a new car, might I suggest you start looking at $40,000 cars, and then potentially taking that $10K and putting it towards art. Unless you're a race car driver, I guarantee you're going to get more enjoyment from that art than you would from that 20% upgrade on the car. Now let's pretend you've refined your taste a bit, and you're ready to step this art collecting up a notch. And now you want to collect art with some longer-term goals in mind. This is where I am with my collection. I'm never going to become rich from the art I own, but perhaps when the time comes, my local art museum might be interested in one or two of my pieces. I have a couple works by Joseph Beuys. They aren't particularly valuable, but they may one day be of interest to the Indianapolis Museum of Art, who already has some great conceptual art from this era, like this Vito Acconci I touched on in a previous video. I have works by Carrie Mae Weems and Derek Adams that I am absolutely crazy about. These are limited edition prints, and they'll never be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they have a good chance of holding their value, or maybe even being worth $10,000 to $20,000 someday, which could become a potentially wonderful gift to my niece or nephew. And in the meantime, I get to live with some really cool stuff. So how do you know what to buy and how much to spend? And this is why I keep telling you to go to every museum you can. You see, collectors often follow what the museums are collecting. Remember way back, like in the year 2010, when museums started having these come to Jesus moments, and they said, oh shit, we forgot to collect women artists. Or around 2015 when they were saying, oh shit, we forgot to collect black artists. Well, thankfully, there is starting to be some progress in rectifying those glaring omissions, but the point is, that's when private collectors started to realize the same thing, and they began to collect art by more women and people of color. And when museums start collecting the same artist, or the same group of artists, that's when value starts to occur. When a piece is taken into the permanent collection of a museum, it is taken off the market. It is presented to a larger public, and scholarship happens. And the more we, and I mean we collectively, start to see an artist and learn about them, the more they start to enter the lexicon, and the higher chance for value retention. Now we've started to learn what to buy. Now, how much do you spend? Thankfully, the art world, which historically has been so opaque, is starting to become somewhat more transparent. Let's pretend you see an Elaine de Kooning at the Museum of Modern Art. You like that abstract mid-century vibe. You like that the artist is female, and you think certainly it is less expensive than that giant Lee Krasner hanging on the adjacent wall. And you'd be right. But how do you learn if that might be something you can afford? Or if there might be other works in your price range that you find equally appealing? I often start my research at a site like Artsy. Pretty much any artist of significance and value will be listed on Artsy, and here you'll find a brief biography as well as a list of what museums collect the artist. And if you scroll down, you'll start to see works that are actually for sale. Here's a gouache on paper for sale from a gallery in California. It's a bit smaller than the one we were looking at MoMA, and it's priced at $75,000. Now, $75,000 is still certainly a lot of money, but if you were thinking that a work by a key abstract expressionist might be over $1 million or even a few $100,000, you see that this warrants further investigation. As we continue to scroll, we notice a number of prints and lithographs by the artist. These are still original artworks, but the artist would work with a printmaker to make multiple images of the same subject. This brings the price down, making the work more accessible to more collectors. And here's a lithograph, about the same size as the painting in MoMA, listed for $7,000. My next step is always to see if that price is justified, so then I start looking at auction house websites. If I go to Phillips and search for Elaine, they will give me a list of all of her work coming up at auction and what her work has sold for in the past. As I scroll, I find a lithograph very similar to the one we were just talking about. Recently, it just sold for under $3,000. Now, I always expect the retail price to be lower than the auction price. The retailer has to store the work, often they display it in a gallery, and of course they need to make a profit. But what this research has shown me is that if this is truly the piece I want, there might be some room for negotiation in there. So now, if we had bought that $40,000 car instead of that $50,000 car, we would also have a freaking Elaine de Kooning on our wall. Now, there's no guarantee this piece of art will go up in value, but it likely won't go down much in value either. And if you buy art like this, you are buying art that is a part of art history, and that is so damn satisfying. We'll talk more art in the art market soon, folks. If you missed my first video on the art market, I'll put a link to it right up here. I always appreciate those that make it to the end, so thank you again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Ciao!